what exactly is the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and how does this affect the Middle East? Both Israeli Jews and Arab Muslims date their claims to the land back to several thousand years, to biblical times as a matter of fact. This conflict started to heat up in the past century when violence erupted in Mandatory Palestine between the Israelis and the Arabs. That started from the year 1920. At that time, Palestine was under British rule, and the termination of the British mandate over Palestine, as well as the Israeli Declaration of Independence, started the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which began after May 14, 1948. From 1920, the whole region was known as Palestine under the British mandate until the Israeli Declaration of Independence in 1948. However, the Jews saw this land, considered Palestine, as their land. The Arab nations, however, argued that since the land had been occupied by Muslims for over 1,000 years, as well as the majority of inhabitants there were Arab-speaking people, then Palestine should be ruled by another Arab nation, let's say Syria, for example. But the argument for the Jewish people to have the land were because the land was originally belonging to the Jews. The Jewish kingdoms had ruled several parts of Palestine for over 1,000 years, and that the land, especially Jerusalem, were very important to the Jewish religion. It stated that the Jews have been praying to return to their homeland for nearly 2,000 years, although throughout history the land known as Palestine had always been occupied by Jews to some degree as well. After the event of the Holocaust, where more than 6 million Jews were killed, they wanted a homeland for themselves. Following that, they were given large parts of Palestine, forming the modern country of Israel, because the Jews had already considered it to be their homeland before the Arabs got there. The Arabs, however, resisted this because they saw the land as theirs. Israel and other surrounding Arab nations fought viciously in several wars over the land, most notably the War of 1948 and the war in 1967. Now, the conflict continues in various degrees to this day. So we got a little bit of a summary of what the conflict is all about, but let's get into a little bit more specifics here. What exactly is Israel? Israel is the world's only Jewish state, and it's located on the southeastern side of the Mediterranean Sea. Upon the Israeli independence in 1948, the country formally adopted the name State of Israel. This was after other proposed names like Land of Israel, Zion, Judea, all of those were considered, but they were rejected. Palestine, on the other hand, is not a country, but rather a de facto state. Palestinians are the Arab population of the areas of land that Israel now controls, and those are referred to the territory of Palestine. The areas, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, make up the Palestinian territories, and these territories are considered by Palestinians as the State of Palestine. The Gaza Strip is controlled by Hamas, an Islamist fundamentalist group. The West Bank is controlled by Palestinian Authority, but under Israeli occupation. Now, despite Israel's separation from Gaza in the year 2005, the majority of governments and political pundits still consider that land to be occupied by Israel. Now, just to go further back into history to establish what Palestine actually is, the Romans had given Palestine its name when they conquered it from the Jews nearly 2,000 years ago. After the Romans were thrown out, Palestine had been part of one Arab or Muslim empire after another since the 7th century. But in World War I, when the Ottoman Empire was defeated, they were stripped of their colonies, and Palestine was a small part of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. The League of Nations then decided which areas would be considered sovereign nations, and they awarded 90% of the land that was stripped from the Ottoman Empire to the Arab states. And because of the war in 1948, around 700,000 Palestinians lost their homes, and this started a huge refugee crisis that is still not resolved to this day. Palestinians refer to this as Nakba, meaning catastrophe in Arabic. Now, in solving this huge conflict, there are two main proposals on how this can be done. One of the proposals is a two-state solution, and pretty much this would establish Palestine as its own independent state in Gaza and most of the West Bank, and that leaves the rest of the land to Israel. Now, although this may appear to be a pretty clear-cut solution, both Israelis and Palestinians are still unclear of how that would work exactly. The other proposal is a one-state solution. Basically, Israel and Palestine Palestine will be just considered one state. But then what state would it be? Israel or Palestine? And what would that say to people that hold on to their Palestinian heritage as well as the Israeli heritage? Although there is conflict between Israel and Palestine, there's still hope for peace in the coming days. The land, which was the birthplace of the largest major religions in the world, contains many people that identify deeply with the culture and the history, as well as it's a land that has significant importance on the global scale. We do hope and pray for peace. Palestine is a region that goes way back to ancient times, and today not all nations consider it to be a country, and we can often get lost in the disputes it has with the Israelis, the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict and everything. So I wanted to just make this video to show Palestine for what it is, separate from all of that. Palestine is a nation with a rich history, culture, as well as traditions that it holds really close. It's also a major center for 3 of the major world religions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Palestine draws people from all around the world, and the current population sits at just over 5 million, and the majority of people are Muslim, although there is a large population of Christians living in Palestine. Now, the word Palestine has its origins from the word Philistia, created by Greek writers, to the region of the Philistines. According to the Ancient History Encyclopedia, the whole of the region was referred to as Canaan in Mesopotamian texts as early as 18th century BCE. While the term Palestine does not appear in any written records until the 5th century BCE in the histories of Herodotus. After Herodotus, the term Palestine came to be used for the entire region, which was formerly known as Canaan. Now, there's some other sources that believe that the name Palestine derives from either the word pleshet, meaning root palish, which is an edible mixture, and the American author Tom Robbins, he suggested that the term Palestine originates from the ancient god Pelesh, and this god was worshipped in the region of Canaan. Now, if this is so, that means Palestine means the land of Pelesh. But either way, guys, regardless of what history of the word that you want to gravitate towards, it all points back to the same exact location and people. One thing to note about Palestine is that the stone industry is the largest sector of the Palestinian economy. Now, there are over 650 stone production sites in the West Bank, 138 of which are in Beit Fajar. Quarried stones are cut into a wide range of different colors like pink, golden, sand, as well as off-white tiles and bricks, which are known as Jerusalem stone. Now, there's a large portion of these stones that are exported to different parts of Europe and North America. Ramallah is a Palestinian city in the central West Bank and located about 10 kilometers north of Jerusalem, and it currently serves as the de facto administrative capital of the Palestinian National Authority. Now, let's look at some facts about the wildlife of Palestine. So, Palestine is known for some of the most beautiful wildflowers in the entire world. So take a look. They pop up in the spring months like April and May, and these include irises, jonquils, wild poppies, as well as other flowers that make the place look very vibrant, just adding some color up in here. Very beautiful. It's not just stone and desert and sand like many people believe. Now, moving from the plant kingdom over into the animal kingdom, there are several species of large wild animals in Palestine as well. They have foxes, mountain gazelles, Nubian ibexes, and that's like a desert species of goat. There's wild boars, you'll see jackals, leopards, hyenas, and many other types of birds as well. Now, take a look. This structure that you see right here, the Great Golden Dome of the Rock, is internationally recognized as a symbol of Jerusalem, but actually getting into this place, which is also considered to be Islam's 3rd holiest site, can be a bit tricky. The entrance for non-Muslims is tucked away behind the security gates for the Western Wall Plaza. And also, if you go there, expect a long lineup, as well as the Golden and Blue Dome of the Rock, which is known as the Kubat as-Sakra, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The sanctuary complex has many other smaller yet amazing and beautiful structures. Speaking of structures though, the Church of Nativity, which is considered to be the birthplace of Jesus, is regarded as a sacred place by both Christians and and Muslims. It also is one of the world's oldest churches. It's located in Bethlehem in the West Bank, which is in Palestine, and the original church is believed to have been built between 330 and 333. However, it was destroyed by fire during the Samaritan revolts of the 6th century, which is estimated to be around the year 529, and the new church was built a number of years later by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. And the final interesting fact about Palestine is that this right here, the Dead Sea or the Sea of Salt, and its main stream of water is the Jordan River. Its surface and shores are 430.5 meters or 1,412 feet below sea level, which is the Earth's lowest elevation on land. Now it's made up of about 34% salt, making it one of the saltiest bodies of water on the planet. Now the Dead Sea has attracted visitors from around the Mediterranean basin for thousands of years, as well as other parts of the world, and it's one of the world's first health resorts, especially during the time of Herod the Great, who you'll find his story in the birth story of Jesus in the Bible. And it has also been a big supplier of a wide variety of products like asphalt, as well as Egyptian mummification products and other things. So as you can see, Palestine has had and will continue to have a very important role on our planet, with being such a focal point among some of the most well-known and impactful religions. It's hard to even imagine a world without Palestine. So we're looking at Israel. Now for decades, the question has been asked, is the land Israel or is it Palestine? So when it comes to the country of Israel, like, is it actually a country? Like, really, what's going on here? Israel is the world's only Jewish state, and it's located east of the Mediterranean Sea. Now Palestinians are the Arab population that come from the land that Israel now controls, and they refer to the territory as Palestine and want to establish a state by that name on all or at least most of the land that Israel controls. And this is behind a lot of the conflict. Currently, when it comes to the population, Israel has about 8.5 million residents. Now there are a few million more than the Palestinian population, which now sits a little bit over 5 million. However, some sources bring that number up to 9.6 million, with over half of them being stateless refugees in different countries in the Middle East, Africa, as well as Europe. So the number of Palestinians are more, it's just that within the Palestinian state, that number is less. Israel is also a parliamentary democracy, and is comprised of legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Around 93% of the land is owned by the State of Israel, the Jewish National Fund or the JNF, and the Development Authority. The Israel Land Authority or the ILA manages the land, and the government issues long-term leasing rights for the land. Next thing to note is Israel has the highest concentration of high-tech and startup companies outside of the United States. Now it has the highest rate of entrepreneurship in the entire world for women and people over the age of 55, and it also has the world's third highest overall. Now getting more into the facts related to the Israeli and the Palestinian dispute, both Jews and Arabs date their claims to the land back thousands of years. However, the current political dispute started in the 20th century. The Jews had fled persecution in Europe and wanted to establish a nation for themselves in what was then an Arab and Muslim majority territory in the Ottoman Empire and later the British Empire. The Arabs, of course, they pushed back, and the United Nations created a plan to give each group a part of the land, but that completely failed. And after the conflict in 1967, Israel was left in control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which are two territories containing large Palestinian populations. Now the city of Jerusalem is also wrapped up in this dispute. It's a city between Israel and the West Bank, and the significance of the city dates back to ancient times, and it's home to some of the holiest sites in both Judaism and Islam. Naturally, both Israelis and Palestinians wanted to make it their capital, and the Jews say Israel was promised to us by God, so we want Jerusalem too. And how to split up Jerusalem in a fair way is still a huge dividing issue between Israelis and Palestinians. Now I did mention the West Bank, right? Now what exactly is it? So the West Bank is a portion of the land to the east of Israel. Now it's home to nearly 3 million Palestinians, and Israel took control of it back in 1967 and has allowed Jewish settlers to move into the land. But the Palestinians and most other nations consider Israel's occupation of the land and completely illegal and just straight up unfair. Now, one interesting fact about Israel, I know it's kind of random, but like per square kilometer, Israel has one of the highest levels of bird traffic in the world. The airspace above Israel is a bird superhighway. So every single autumn, over 5 million birds cross Israel's airspace, and they're heading to warmer temperatures in Africa. And when this happens, it literally causes a bird bottleneck, and you may want to stay indoors when this happens. Like, we know how birds like to drop those unexpected surprises when they fly over us. Yeah, gross, right? Now, Israel is the only country in the world that has the same name. It's located in the same place and speaks the same language as it did 3,000 years ago. Most of the Jews were forced out by the Romans into exile after the destruction of King Solomon's temple in Jerusalem back in the year 70 CE. But the Jewish people did not all leave. And at that time, Israel wasn't a country. So when the term ancient Israel is used, it often refers to the tribes and kingdom formed by the ancient Jewish people in the Levant, which is an area that encompasses modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. And the final note I want to leave you off with is Judaism is a religion, culture, philosophy, as well as a way of life for the Jewish people. It is an ancient monotheistic religion, and Judaism is the 10th largest religion in the world. Judaism is the expression of the covenant that is said to have been established with the children of Israel by God. And the children of Israel became Israel of ancient times. However, the term Judaism stems from the tribe of Judah that was a part of ancient Israel. Now, this was a tribe that it was believed that the Messiah would be born and become the savior of the whole world. Palestine is not alone. There are powerful nations that not only recognize Palestine as a state, but also offer support through financial and diplomatic aid. In this episode of FTD Facts, we'll be looking at 10 countries that support Palestine. Starting at number 10, we have the country of Pakistan. Pakistan has been one of the leading nations in voicing their support for Palestine. There have been demonstrations across Pakistan in solidarity with Palestinians. Demonstrators also held up Pakistani and Palestinian flags at many demonstration sites across the country after Prime Minister Imran Khan called for a day of solidarity. Also, Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi's remarks on CNN have gone viral, and he's made it clear what Pakistan's stance is when it comes to Palestine and Israel.
What are their connections?
Deep pockets.
What does that mean?
Well, they're very influential people. I mean, they control media.
I mean, I would call that an anti-Semitic remark.
The Irish Parliament recently has passed a motion condemning the de facto annexation of Palestinian land by Israeli forces. Now, this makes it the first European Union country to use this specific phrase, de facto annexation, in relation to Israel's actions in occupied Palestinian territories. There was also this video from an Irish parliament featuring Richard Boyd Barrett discussing the issue with Palestinians. Well, that clip has gone viral, although it was recorded back in the year 2014. But his message has reached far more people now because of the current events.
Most of which has taken place since Oslo. You allow that to happen. Why do you allow it to happen? If you're serious about giving this land to the Palestinians, it's absolutely extraordinary. And it just, you must, are you not just taking us, Ambassador, for idiots? That you can say with a straight face, we're serious about peace, but while we're serious about peace, we're going to seize Palestinian land.
Next up, we have Indonesia. Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi said this in a virtual press conference. Indonesia will continue to work with the Palestinian people and nation in fighting for their rights. She had also said that Indonesia will continue to do its best to support Palestine in the UN General Assembly. Then there was Indonesian President Joko Widodo. He has openly condemned Israeli forces and the violence against Palestinians, especially at Al-Aqsa Mosque. He's urging the UN Security Council to take measures on the repeated violations carried out by Israel towards the Palestinians. Next on this list is the country of Sweden. Sweden was actually the first European Union country to recognize Palestine as a state. Margot Wallström, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Sweden at the time, back in 2014, had these words to say. It is an important step that confirms the Palestinian right to self-determination. Today's recognition is a contribution to a better future for a region that has for too long been characterized by frozen negotiations, destruction, and frustration. Some will state this decision comes too soon. I'm afraid rather that it is too late. At number 6, we have Saudi Arabia. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's permanent representative to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, Saleh Hamad al-Suhabani, he said that the Israeli violations flagrantly contravene the principles of international humanitarian law and defy UN Security Council resolutions. Saudi Arabia also calls on the international community to take immediate action to compel Israel to halt all practices that violate the rights of the Palestinian people, and I quote, who have suffered greatly and are still struggling to obtain their most important legitimate rights to establish security and safety, achieve economic growth, and improve their conditions. This is according to al-Suhabani. Continuing this episode now at number 5, we got to look at the country of Iran. According to the head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami, Iran supports the Palestinian fight against Israel. They also do not recognize Israel as a state. Iranian officials, they have called on the United Nations and also other Muslim nations to start taking action and step in to stop apartheid Israel from attacking Palestine. Also, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani, he started to raise this issue with Turkey, saying that Iran and Turkey must band together as two major players in the entire region to urge the UN and the OIC, or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, to fight against the crimes of Israel. That's how they term it. Turkey's President Erdogan has made his voice heard loud and clear, and he has been urging the world to take effective action against Israeli forces, especially in light of the attacks on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the attacks in Jerusalem, and also just on Palestinian homes in general. President Erdogan, he had this to say in a tweet: Jerusalem is the world itself, and the Muslims, they are humanity itself. He also said that protecting the honor and dignity of the holy city of Jerusalem was the duty of every single Muslim in the world. Number 3 brings us to Egypt. Egypt is a nation that continues to provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinians and has sent a delegation from the Egyptian Red Crescent, or the ERC, to the Gaza Strip to see what are the most urgent needs of the people there. Egypt says that this is in efforts to provide aid and assistance in various fields, and also to affirm Egypt's leading role in supporting the people of Palestine. India was actually one of the first countries to recognize the state of Palestine back in the year 1988. Now, when we look back to 1996, India opened its representative office to the Palestine Authority in Gaza, which later was shifted to Ramallah in 2003. And rewind back to the year 1975, India became the first non-Arab country to recognize the Palestinian Liberation Organization as the sole representative of the Palestinian people, and invited it to open an office in Delhi, India. And then in the year 1988, when the PLO declared an independent state of Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem, India granted recognition immediately. And the country we end off with at number 1 is China. China recognized the state of Palestine also back in the year 1988. And since the year 1992, China has really established great diplomatic relations with Israel and also has maintained cordial relationships with Palestine. But here's the thing, with recent events, according to the Global Times, they reported on May 28, 2021 that China will offer $1 million in emergency humanitarian assistance cash to Palestine, and also another $1 million for 200 doses of the vaccine to help refugees. Ambassador Chen Zhu of China called on Israel to observe the relevant UN resolutions and to stop its demolition of Palestinian homes and also the eviction of Palestinian Palestinian people. They also urge Israel to discontinue its settlement expansion as well as maintain and respect the holy sites in the city of Jerusalem. Throughout the world, public opinion about Palestine has been changing. Many nations have begun to shift towards recognizing Palestine as a state, but there are still many nations that have not begun the process of recognizing Palestine. At number 10, with the country of United States. The United States does not recognize the state of Palestine, but what it does is it accepts the Palestine Liberation Organization, or the PLO, as a representative of the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian National Authority as the authority legitimately governing the Palestinian territories under the Oslo Accords. Now, the next country we're looking at is the country of France. The French President Emmanuel Macron, he said that he would not recognize Palestine as an independent state as a reaction to the former US President Donald Trump's declaration of Jerusalem being Israel's capital, not Palestine's capital. Now, back in the summer of 2020, more than 100 French lawmakers, they called on President Macron to recognize the state of Palestine. So there are some movements there, but not quite enough in recognizing Palestine. Next up, we have Switzerland. Although Switzerland does not recognize a Palestinian state bilaterally, it has established relations with the Palestinian Authority ever since the Oslo Accord was signed back in the year 1993. Also, in the year 2015, there was a cooperation framework that was set up at a bilateral level, and it outlines important aspects of cooperation between Switzerland and the Palestinian Authority. Now let's talk about Australia. Australia does not recognize a Palestinian state also. They, however, are committed to a two-state solution in which Israel and a future Palestinian state, according to them, coexist in peace within internationally recognized borders, of course. Now, in the year 2018, in the month of December, Australia acknowledged the vision of the Palestinian people for a future state with the capital in East Jerusalem. Denmark is also another country that does not recognize the state of Palestine. That's right, they do not recognize Palestine's existence and its rights to sovereignty. This stops any actual relations to be formed and has in some ways been a little hostile to the Palestinian Authority at times. Back in the year 2014, there was a bill that called on Denmark to recognize Palestine as a state. But this, as expected by most people, was completely shot down in Parliament. Despite this, however, the Foreign Minister of Denmark still suggests that Denmark will be a step closer to recognizing a Palestinian state. Moving on to number 5, we have Germany. Back in April of 2011, Chancellor Angela Merkel labeled the Palestinian bid for recognition as a unilateral step and stated that Germany will not recognize a Palestinian state without it first being accepted by Israel. She also made it clear that the German government has a commitment to see an agreement reached as soon as possible. In a statement, she said this, and I quote, "We want a two-state solution. We want to recognize a Palestinian state. Let us ensure that negotiations begin. It is urgent." Moving on now to Japan. Nabil Shaath, who is the advisor to the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas for External Affairs and International Relations, stated that Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono, who was a previous foreign minister actually, was collecting signatures of Japanese members of parliament for the purpose of strongly encouraging the government of Japan to recognize Palestine. He also told the radio station Voice of Palestine that Japan will recognize Palestine gradually and is expected to raise the level of Palestinian diplomatic representation in Japan. Now let's look at New Zealand. According to Scoop Media, New Zealand governments of the past have claimed to take an even-hand approach to the Middle East, but this is not exactly accurate. New Zealand has bilateral arrangements with Israel, but there's very minimal interactions with Palestinians. It is believed that recognizing Palestine as a state will be an important step in helping redress the imbalance and preparing for peace and a situation that will be beneficial to both Palestinians and Israelis. So their position on this is still pretty ambiguous, but what we can take from that is that they do not recognize a Palestinian state. Moving on to number 2, the country of the Netherlands. The Netherlands, like the European Union, favors a two-state solution. In early 2019, though, the Netherlands recognized Gaza, the West Bank, as official birthplaces for Palestinians. So Palestinians living in the Netherlands who were born after the year 1948 are now allowed to register the Gaza Strip and the West Bank as their place of birth, instead of having to use Israel or just unknown. However, the Netherlands does not yet recognize the state of Palestine. Now we end off this episode with the country at number 1. We have Austria. So not too long ago, Austria disputed the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over Palestinian territories. Representative Office of Austria to Palestine, Astrid Wien, was summoned by the Palestinian diplomat Amal Jaidu, and this was all over some observations that were submitted. And in these observations, Austria doubted the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Courts over the Palestinian territories. The legal observations stated that, and I quote, Austria does not recognize Palestine as a sovereign state and has not established diplomatic relations with Palestine at the bilateral level.